Thank y'all for coming. I'm Danicka Oglesby. I'm with the SideFX Labs team, and I'm here to talk about what we've done in the past year or so, talk about what Labs is, who we are, what we do, how we do it a little bit. So it's just a general overview. We'll talk about our tools, and I'll talk a bit about what makes a tool, like how we decide to make a tool, and I'll be talking about one of the tools I helped develop specifically. So we have a suite of about 300 tools so far that we support, and most of them are focused on like bridging pipelines, improving workflows and quality of life of artists and Houdini users. So Labs is separate from native Houdini in that we have more like, we build prototype tools, or we have more experimental tools that we can publish to help people. So it is separate, but still the same. We still consider, we're still 100% Houdini. We're just allowed to be a little more freeform. So different areas of tools that we create fall into sort of anywhere that anyone needs help with. Like every department needs tools and help with tedious workflows and menial tasks. So here's just like a list of all the different stuff we experiment with. And as technical artists, it is important to be like flexible and be able to like jump into any one of these areas and provide support to artists or even for engineers, bridging that gap between artists and more technical people is where tech artists exist in. So if I were to classify the sort of types of tools that we create, they fall in some different levels. Sort of like the one end being like artist tools that are almost basically production ready. They provide you geometry. They even provide like shader hookup support. Not the shaders themselves, but like they're one step away from being a finished product. We have what we sort of describe as production building blocks, which are tools that make tools, or tools that provide clever or creative solutions to certain problems. And I know that's vague, but there's a lot of problems in art that people need support for, that they need tools for. Data transfer is another one, especially in like real-time techniques, because you can't always, between film and between real-time techniques, you have to have like more clever solutions to import your data, say into Unreal or Unity. Like if you have vertex animation textures to store your animation data in, that's different from being able to like export a whole animation sequence into a game engine. So we provide support for like I said, vertex animation textures, flipbook textures, volume textures, a lot of texture work in real-time techniques. And then we have some quality of life tools integrated into Houdini itself that just make using Houdini like a little bit easier, a little bit nicer. And I'll talk a little bit about tools we have in each category. So our first big, sometimes they're like showstopper tools that we sort of display, especially with Project Titan. It's been a game or development recently that we pull tools from. So if y'all are familiar with the Project Titan, we have pulled tools from that to give people these artist quality assets or HDAs to use that are almost ready. So the building generator, it allows you to, it gets you most of the way there. So you build your modules and you can modify those modules based on a pattern syntax that you put into the tool. And so it gets artists like 90% of the way there to creating this procedural building. And this was important because a lot of people have sort of their own building techniques that they use, or procedural building solutions that they have. And so we wanted to provide that to people who maybe don't have a tech art team that can create this procedural system. And secondly, we have a cable generator, again, coming from Project Titan, one of these artist-friendly tools that get you most of the way there. They create these, I'll go back to this. They create these sort of complex-looking suite of cables with simulated physics. And here in the example, it'll show you how it works with different inputs. So it's almost there, and you just have to provide a few simple inputs and maybe a shader on at the end to get something that looks really sophisticated. And here it's showing you can even put it through objects, and you can attach it to different places. Here we go. So the work is already, being done under the hood, and this is more of our artist-friendly tool. Mesh tiler tool that we have, seeing from the example here, you have like one simple mesh, and then you can multiply it over a region. And so say you want to do like a rigid body sim on fruits or something, and you can just do a small portion. You don't have to worry about filling a whole bucket of fruits. You can do a small portion and tile it away. And we have a suite of tree tools. Can be used to create different vegetation types, trees, corals. It has like physical controls for like gravitropism, like if the branches droop down. And it's a hierarchical based tool system. So you like model the trunk, the branches, and then leaves at the very end. And each little setting based on the style of tree you're trying to generate will control the overall shape of the tree. So here we have coral, but if you were to list the default nodes down, or if you were to put them down, it'll get you like a generic tree. And I was even able to modify the settings at one point to make like a willow tree. So it provides artists those controls to make whatever they need to make. So it's still like generic enough that you can create what you want, but procedural that it makes it quite easily, and it's easy to make variants with it as well. So, there you go. Production, so the production building blocks, again, they solve problems, or they make clever solutions to different things, and we find that people can integrate them into tools that they're trying to create for their own team. And so one of the ones, I recently worked on this one, is a fast remesh option, because Houdini's native remeshing can be quite slow on large meshes, or it can be slow if you're trying to get a very high resolution mesh. And so this was a great candidate for labs to make into a tool, and it sections out a mesh with different clusters, and it operates, or it performs the remeshing operation on each cluster individually, sews it all back up at the end, and it's basically identical almost to the results you get out of Houdini's native remeshing, except at a much faster rate. And so it's an example of like a quality of life improvement that we like to give people. Another tool we have is Edge Smooth. It turns high resolution assets into more stylized low poly assets, because we know with like real-time techniques, you have to have control over your poly counts or make sure things aren't getting too crazy. So especially with like photogrammetry pipelines, you have this high-res asset coming in. Maybe, poly reduce doesn't give you quite the look you're going for. And so we have Edge Smooth that can maybe get you closer to the style you're going for right off the bat. And another cool feature of Edge Smooth that was kind of unintended was it makes really cool textures sometimes. It makes sort of like water or like more effect type textures. And like it wasn't intended when the tool was created to make this, but it just so happens, and so we're claiming credit for it. You can use it wherever you want. Another intermediary tool is Polywire UV. It's similar to Houdini's native Polywire tool, except it produces consistent and robust UVs, and you can animate along these UVs, and it doesn't have to like recalculate every single frame, and much more artist friendly to use, and much more intuitive with UV control than traditional Polywire. So again, another great candidate for a labs tools to make people's lives easier. One of our newer tools that has come out is Resample by density, and if you follow the demonstration here, the ramp shows the distribution of density along the curve. So where the ramp is higher, there's going to be more number of points in that area. And we developed this just to give people another option. It's like, how do you want to resample your curves? Do you want to have more control without having to sit there and put points in manually? Another one of our tools is edge grouped polylines, which I think is really handy, because you say you select your group of edges and you want to do something with that edge. It's like, well, how do you convert that into a usable line or a usable curve? And with the magic of edge grouped polylines, it just sort of handles that for you. And along that same vein, we have loops from selection. So normally, if you're like selecting an edge loop, you'll click and it'll select your ring for you. But what if you want a more procedural system, if you want it based off of pattern, if you want more control and you don't want to have to alternate clicking every other edge and say, something changes and you have to go back and reselect and click. That's a lot of manual work when you can just have a procedural system for it. And so there's an option for edges and an option for quads, and there's options to like select one out of every 2 or 3 out of every 4, and or offset it by 1 and create like maybe even a checkerboard pattern across your object. And you can use that to drive procedural controls later. We have a remove overlap tool. Some of these tools are coming out of like photogrammetry procedures. And if you auto UV a photogrammetry asset, you can get a really complex looking set of UVs. And you can have artifacts. And one of the artifacts was overlapping UVs. And how do we solve this? So this tool was created to identify these areas and to help eliminate them as well. We have a physical ambient occlusion, which is a more accurate calculation of ambient occlusion, and the before and after is our ambient occlusion we had before, and the after is the new and improved one. This is consistent more for a render engine, and it holds the result as an attribute, so you can use the attribute as a mask to drive things later. And it's just a more accurate and nicer looking result, because I believe the previous version was a little more flickery, a little more inconsistent, and so this is much more in line with what we would expect in a render engine. We also have Superformula Shapes, which was a community contribution / community. We identified it as a contribution, and we reached out to the artist and we said, hey, can we put this in labs? And they're like, absolutely. And this tool is a lot of fun because it uses the Superformula, which is a trig ellipsoid formula, and by modifying a few variables, you can create all sorts of different shapes. I think it's like 3 different variables, and you sit there and you adjust the sliders, and you can make stars and flowers and spokes, and it comes out all over the place. And yeah, is originally grabbed by Joe Rivera. I think I'm saying his name correctly. And so as a mathematician, I really like this tool because I think it's cool that you can use one formula and modify it just to create whatever shape you want. But there is one tool that it's almost ready to come out called Simple Shapes, which offers more straightforward controls over more common shapes. Superformula is a little bit more mathematical, a little more technical, and so I really like that. But if someone is just wants maybe like a square and they want to shear it or they want to rotate it, the Simple Shapes is more in line for that. But I think this is really interesting, and all of our labs nodes are, you can dive into them and see how they're set up and see how they work, because it's all open source. So if you wanted to like dive in and look at how the Superformula is modifying these shapes, you can just go into the node, check and see what's going on, and see for yourself. So let's talk a bit about data transfer and different ways, different techniques we have to export data from Houdini and bring it into a system like Unreal. One of our more common ones is Unreal Pivot Painter. And so we've upgraded in the past year Pivot Painter to support Unreal Engine's Pivot Painter 2.0 because they updated it. So we updated our Pivot Painter to keep working with that. And it encodes the pivots and rotation data of the geometry into textures to drive the animation in real time with shaders. So all the different, positions, rotations, all encoded into like textures, and you can bring that into Unreal. And this was used in the Matrix Awakens as one of their techniques. And in line with that, so this is using our tree tools. So we have different trees here than the corals earlier. Tree hierarchy was made to work in conjunction with Pivot Painter. So you wire our tree tools into this tree hierarchy tool. It will, draw out the rotation data, the pivot points, the mesh, and it'll clean it all up for you so you can bring it into Unreal and use it with Pivot Painter. We have Unreal Groom Export. So this is more like a character animation tool. You can export your Houdini Groom, your strand-based Groom, into Unreal Engine. It conforms the hair in Houdini to the Alembic-based files used in Unreal. Our volume texture node, it gets a volume from Houdini. It slices it up in different layers, and you can specify the number of layers you need. And it exports that as a texture. You can bring that into Unreal, create a shader around it, and recreate that sliced texture, sliced volume in Unreal. And that's what that spinning demo is. It's like a real-time Unreal recording of the volume. JSON Exporter, so another data type. It's much more human readable than CSV. I remember having to write custom Python scripts to export our stuff into a JSON, and it's like, oh, we have this new attribute that we need to export now. It's like, all right, I have to go and modify this big Python script so it can export in JSON. Well, now we have a JSON exporter node, and it handles all that for you, and it relieves workload off of tech artists as well as artists. Oh, and quick note, because I saw a couple comments about this. This is a ROP context node, not a SOP context node. So if you're trying to use this node, be careful what context you're in, because you're not going to find it in SOP. You have to put down like a render node or a render context. So some quality of life tools we have like in Houdini itself. I use a handful of these when I'm working. One that came out of a customer request is Cook with Timeout top. So it's a top wrapper around a SOP network, and this will prevent your workflow or your HDA from cooking longer than the specified amount of time. Because say you are working with maybe a tool that's a little too finicky and you change one parameter, and instead of taking 5 minutes to cook, it takes an hour to cook. And you're like, well, I didn't want that. And you try and escape out of it, and your Houdini session crashes, something just goes wrong. So if you're working with a tool that's giving you a lot of some grief, you can wire it into Cook with Timeout, and it'll just automatically stop, and it won't close your session and lose all your work. And if you're trying to experiment more with a certain tool and you don't know what it's going to do, it'll give you that layer of control. Another quality of life tool I've used a couple of times is Capture and Embed. Let me see. So we have a labs menu in this object context where we have some of our tools, and this is where capture and embed is. So you select the capture and embed option, and basically your next drag and drop selection will take a screenshot of what you selected, and it will put it in your object view. And you can scale it, move it around, and once you're done with it, it becomes part of the background, and you can put nodes on top of it. So if you want, like, I don't know, a custom sticker for your network view, or I use it to put reference images in my viewport, or not my viewport, next to my viewport. It's a great way, just another way to improve the quality of life. I really like this feature. It helps me out a lot. It's node parameter differences. So if I'm working with two of the same nodes previously, and I liked sort of the parameters on one node and sort of the parameters on another node, I'd click back and forth between them to see what the parameter differences were. And you've got a long list of parameters, not all of them are going to be different, and you're trying to see which is which. And I would like write it down on a notepad. I'm like, this parameter is this value and this parameter this value. Well, this tool, it'll show you the differences between two of the same node types, and it'll show you which parameters are different and which values are different. And that is much more useful. Like, it's a big help to me when I'm trying to see the difference between two nodes. Scan for non-latest lab nodes. The thing with labs is that we're constantly pushing updates where we don't release the same way like native Houdini releases. We're just always releasing, always coming out with fixes and new tools. And if you have our nodes integrated into your workflow, sometimes you want that version control. Sometimes you want to stop at a version and you don't want to update after that. But if you do want to update your nodes and you're worried that you might be working with outdated nodes, we have an easy way to scan and see which of your nodes have updates to them since the last time you've put them in. Another thing about labs is not only do we make tools, do we offer support for those tools, and are we trying to like make people's lives easier? We're also more on the education side as well, and we want to teach people how to make tools. And when we release tools, we try and make sure they're very high quality so that anyone who looks at them can dissect the way they were made and get ideas and techniques and use them in their own tools. So like, we're all open source, very education focused. We want to teach you how to use Houdini, and we want to sort of close that learning gap. So tutorials are important to us, or we try and make things as accessible as possible, and a great way to learn about our tools that we have, not all the tools, but we try and update this with a new tool every few weeks or so. It's a little bit easier when we have interns to update this ArtStation. But we want to show practical applications of our tools. So when we release an ArtStation post demoing what we've done, we try and make it as artist, end quality as possible. So we try and make things very artistic, very eye-catching, to see that you can, start with this tool, but take it to that end artist quality. So it's not just like eye candy. If you go into a post, it'll show you a little breakdown of the tool, and there's even some tutorials that accompany some of these posts. So here, for example, is our trim texture post. We have a row of bookshelves and a library up top, so that's sort of like the end product that was used. And here we have a video that accompanies it, showing you sort of best practices for the tool, a slight demo of how it works, different parameters that have been adjusted. And most demos, I say most because I don't want to say all, but 90% of the demos do come with an example HIVE file you can download and see how the tool is working for yourself. Here is a shot of an effect that one of our interns put together and created a tutorial for. This uses a lot of different Houdini techniques, procedural modeling, rigid body destruction, explosions, sprite sheets, flipbook textures, vertex animation textures, and there, I want to see it again. And so it uses a lot of Houdini techniques. It uses a lot of different export techniques to bring into Unreal and work with, Niagara, work with Unreal's effect system to create much more complex and high quality VFX, and maybe you could get away with Niagara or Chaos alone. And there is a tutorial on how exactly this is all done, a lot of different techniques. So I think this is like a really well-rounded way just to get your feet wet with different effects techniques, bringing it into a real-time engine. And we also have another one on a lightning strike and also a tutorial series on that. Because when I was first learning effects, I'm like, how do I even go from Houdini to, I was using Unity at the time. I was like, how do I bridge that gap? Like, I had no idea. So I would have really appreciated this back in 2016. And another one is this Fire Pack. So there's no tutorial on this, but there is a HIVE file with all the flames that was used in this scene, and a simplified Unreal project that shows all the assets being used in this Unreal project. And this is available. You can navigate through the ArtStation page and find where this is downloaded, or where you can download this and where this is available. I think that's the easiest way to find it. But it is available on our community site. And then more specifically to our tools is when we release a new tool, we're making an effort to make these making of videos, and we have like 2 sets of videos that we release with each tool. One is a very short video that just shows you how to use it and shows you best practices. And the much longer video, or about 10 minutes, it'll give you a breakdown of how the tool was actually created, what techniques were used, why we chose to use the techniques we chose. And it gives a much deeper technical explanation into the tools, because again, we want to make sure we're getting across as much information about, how to make tools as possible. And so I want to sort of walk through the making of a labs tool, how we decided this was a good tool, what we had to do to sort of get it labs ready. And I'll be talking about Fast Remesh, because it's one I personally worked on. So again, it performs a remeshing operation on different clusters, which you can see by the different colored pieces of this mesh. And it performs it in for each loops with a compile block. So each one of these clusters is being processed in parallel, making it much faster than even just doing a small mesh on native remeshing alone. This tool came out of a tech art submission to our forums, and we were excited about it. A lot of people were excited about it. I reached out to the artist. I said, can we incorporate this in the labs? They were also excited about it. It was a great candidate because, again, it improved the quality of life of artists if you want to remesh very quickly. When I was practicing this, I was using, multiple million poly meshes, and I was really trying to push this tool to the limit to make sure that when we released it, it would be that much of a improvement. And so, explained previously, each one of these little pieces processed in parallel through Houdini's native remeshing. And there's 4 steps. So not 4 steps to this tool. When you bring it in, it first has to be partitioned out. So this first section, you cut up the piece, partitioned out, you remesh it in parallel. Is that tiny middle section is the actual remeshing. But then after, you're left with all these disconnected pieces, and you have to sew them back together, which was a lot harder than it sounds. It's a lot harder than just a simple fuse operation in some aspects. You have to really look at what's happening, what artifacts are being created, and then you have to create more techniques on top of that to fuse everything back together. And then post-processing, if you want to recalculate normals, if you need to do some more mesh cleanup, and that's the anatomy of fast remesh. It supports multiple partitioning types, so we want to make it flexible. So if you want to partition by UV connectivity or just generic 3D connectivity, or if you want to cluster your object into buckets of polygons and then process those, we wanted to have a very flexible selection process. Multiple remeshing types, so you can remesh by a set remeshing distance, like it'll try and keep edge lengths a specific length, or you can remesh by polygon count. If you say, I want my target polygon count to be 50,000, it's going to try as best as it can to meet that remeshing goal. Or if you have, there's a couple other goal types that are escaping me at this time, but making it flexible for people to use. And also, out of this tool, we released it, and someone said, oh, you know, this first partitioning section, that'd be cool if it was its own tool, so I can partition my mesh and use other operations on it later. So I don't want all of fast remesh, I just want the partitioning section, and so that's something I've been working on lately myself. So it's like tools that make tools, and inside of tools, but and you can dive in and see how all of this was put together. And I left notes and comments and boxes to try and explain how everything's working together. And one thing about, or many things about SideFX Labs, is when we release tools, we try and make them as easy to use as possible. And that includes going through like a robust vetting process. So we, on the team, we will all review each other's tools. We'll spend hours in talks together, talking about UI flow, talking about parameter names, talking about if the tool is working efficiently, and we'll sit there and we'll test it and we'll break each other's stuff and try and make sure we're putting out the greatest quality that we can. Documentation is also included on all of our tools, or should be included on all of our tools, to provide more clarity. We also have standardized practices that we use for releasing HDAs or for naming things. We try and make things as clear and uniform as possible throughout our tool set, and we're also improving past tools and bringing them up to date with our current standards. And so once a tool is done, it's released, it's pushed to our SideFX Lab Git repository. That's where SideFX Labs lives. Again, everything open source, available to everyone to download. And the easiest way to get SideFX Labs is to, it says the update through the shelf tool, but if you're using the Houdini launcher, you can also update SideFX Labs through Houdini launcher and get either the daily build or the production build. Or if you're more tech savvy and you don't want to wait for the daily build, you want to get it whenever it comes out, you can clone directly from GitHub and hook it up to your project, however which way you want. So that, yeah, GitHub is like our most up to date, but daily builds come out the day after we push to Git. So it's, you know, a day after, you know, the most up to date. Also, GitHub is nice because it has comments on all of our changes if you want to see what's been fixed or what's been updated or what's been added. And so labs, we try and, you know, have exposure of labs. Like, you know, there's so many tools. It's like, how do I learn about what's out there? How do I prevent myself from creating a tool that already exists that I could have been using this whole time? And one of those is our roadmap. We've recently released this in our last year. It's a public site available to everyone. It's a new great way to interface with our users. It shows what we've recently released. It has a wish list of what we plan to release. It has a submit feedback button, and you can submit your own tool ideas. You can vote on different tools if you say, I want this tool, or this tool isn't that important to me, because we really do rely on user feedback to drive what we do, and we try to keep our ear to the ground and see what's out there and try and create helpful things for our users. So we do love hearing from our users, whether it's bug reports or RFEs or tweeting us on Twitter. There's some bugs I found about because someone was tweeting about them and it got sent to me, and I was like, oh, I'll fix this ASAP. And, you know, so just that communication line. Talked about ArtStation a little bit already. It's our most like eye-catching section. I think like a more artist-friendly way to see what's going on with labs. We also have a Twitter. We post updates if we have like a new tool that came out, or we also like post inspirational things from different 3D artists, or helpful links to tutorials. Like I think I saw an Intagma one posted up there. It's another way that we connect with you guys. And then if you really, really want to see what's going on, you can get into our GitHub, look at all of our commits, look at all of our fixes, and each one has a explanatory commit message with it. So if we have a new tool, it'll be marked with new tool, and you can see what we just put out. Or if you see a bug fix and you're like, oh, thank goodness, that bug I submitted a long time ago was finally fixed. You can see what's going on there. And it's the most up-to-date way that we put out information. There are new projects in the works, some cool big things that are coming out. I wish I could talk more about them, but I'm really excited about them. We're really excited about them. It's sort of like a new direction for labs a little bit. We're still the same as we always were, but we're trying to think bigger and try and tackle bigger problems. And I really wish I didn't have to be so vague, but I'm really excited, so just keep watching. And I hope that was useful. It was like an overview of labs. I know some people are already familiar with labs, so I wanted to make sure there's some people who didn't know about labs. I wanted to make sure there's stuff for people who already knew. So I hope this was helpful, and I really appreciate you spending your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Danicka. That was awesome. I also want to give a chance here to open this up for questions. Does anybody have any questions regarding, like this is your chance to talk directly to somebody that builds these tools from SideFX. So are there any questions about either the process of making labs tools that you want to see in the future, usage of labs tools? Now is the time. And I will come and bring the microphone to you so we can capture the question and everybody can hear it. So I'll work my way around. I've got one right here in the front.
Hello, how you doing? So I've been recently wanting to get into tool building and stuff like that. So does one just use Python and C++ for tool building inside of Houdini? And like, how do I start? How do I figure out like what problem I need to solve inside Houdini?
Yeah, that's a good question, because working in a bubble, you don't see what problems other people are having. So when I first got into making tools, I was working at a game studio alongside other artists, and I was looking at the repetitive tasks they were doing, and I said, no, like I can make something that does that for you in maybe a minute instead of having to spend a whole day adjusting arrows or something. And so it's identifying, it helps to work with other people, or if you have a problem you keep running into and you build a workflow for yourself and you're like, this solves my own problem, well, it might solve other people's problems as well. So it's identifying tricky parts in a workflow that you can fix. And it's not necessarily Python or C++. I haven't touched C++ in ages. When working in Houdini, everything's node-based, so we use native Houdini nodes to assemble a tool that performs a specific task. There's sometimes I might need to use Python, or I might need to use Vex to implement a really low-level solution that there's just no node for this, so I have to implement it myself. So having that background in Python, C++ is very helpful. Vex is C-based. So having that background is very useful, because there are times where you're like, I need Vex for this. Nothing exists for this. So seeing what problems other people are running into, learning to develop artist-friendly or user-friendly tools is a big one, because you want to make sure if you hand a tool off that it's not too finicky, that it's easy to understand. So going back and forth with someone else, getting feedback on your own tool, and you give it to someone, like when I make a tool, I really like our interns because I give it to them with no documentation. And I say, can you use this without documentation? If not, why? And then I'll go back and forth. and make sure that they can use it. Because if, you know, an intern can use it, most of our users can use it. And so just don't work in that bubble, and having a good engineering or programming background does help a lot.
Awesome. There were other hands that went up earlier. Work back here in the back. Oh boy. It's Mr. Andre.
Hey, Danicka, great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any plans on doing some more NURBS tools?
NURBS tools.
Yes.
I can say that we do not have any plans for NURBS specifically. A lot of our tools are revolving around world building recently and photogrammetry. If you do have a NURBS specific tool you would like, we'd love to hear about it. If that's a need in the community, like we'd love to hear what's going on.
Well, maybe do a tutorial on how to model a car in Houdini.
A tutorial. Let's see. There's probably one that exists already, but if there is a need for that, that is definitely something that we would be interested. There's lots of stuff we would love to do, just don't have the time to do it all. And so we do have like hotspots or high priority stuff that we are focusing on. So the more attention that's called to a certain area, the more we're drawn to see it, and the higher priority we'll give to it. So unfortunately, we can't tackle everyone's problems, though I wish we could.
Hi, I love this presentation.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. You mentioned the ArtStation and the public roadmap website.
Yes.
Is there a place where it has like every single labs tool? Because I know there's got to be hundreds of them now.
Yeah. There's close to about 300, and the most comprehensive list we would have in one place is the documentation on SideFX website, because it'll say, labs, this tool, labs Remesh, and it'll just a long list of labs tools. If you can find that, that's the longest list.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, we have another question. Yes, sir.
Hello, thank you. I'm from a school district. I'm a middle school teacher.
Oh, cool.
And so we're looking at wanting to try to implement side effects, hopefully at our school, teaching them something, at least something real beginner. But my question is more about, you said about world building. What are you guys doing concerning procedural generation, especially, let's just say something around like dungeons in a game. They have something like Dungeon Generator in Unreal Marketplace. You guys are able to integrate that, or are you doing something similar or a little more advanced?
Yeah, one of our most recent SideFX people, Simon, he made a bunch of tutorials on world generation, and it's specifically Houdini to Unreal, a workflow. Project Titan is this giant world building project that he worked on. And while he doesn't have like a dungeon generator for Project Titan specifically, he did make a sort of dungeon generator tutorial for like a Houdini engine tutorial. It makes like sections of rooms and different modular pieces of these rooms and sort of tunneling through these large pieces of geometry. I know Simon's been really popular with a lot of the students I've talked to, because he produces artist quality tutorials. So it's not just the technical end of things. He gets to the artist level, and he produces a lot of content on his own, and he's produced a lot of content for Project Titan, and I know a lot of students have gotten a lot of value out of his work there.
Awesome. Are there other questions? Cool. I would say if you haven't checked out Project Titan, definitely do. The idea of like Houdini being difficult, like as a tool building tool with scripts and vex and that type of thing, is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is grabbing an HDA and going into Unity or Unreal or whatever your game engine is, and dragging out a curve, and from that curve, you're building a fence with bushes and shrubs all the way around it, right? So there's a tool that exists that does a lot of really neat stuff, where an entry-level user, especially at like a middle school or high school level that doesn't have familiarity with 3D, can get like quick time to first success. Grab this tool, plug it in, let's do some really neat curves, and as we're drawing curves, we're actually building a rich environment to work with just by dragging out a few curves and making a couple of adjustments, right? Yeah. Awesome. We have a question from the gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm from SideFX. Just one more thing to add to that is the Houdini Game Dev Starter Kit that Simon also built. It was built specifically to lead into the Global Game Jam a couple of years ago, and it was designed to be super beginner friendly, so that you could. It was a series of tools that he built that were very easy to use and bring into Unreal, and we had another one for Unity. So there's both game engines. So that is available on SideFX.com.
And if anybody is needing like access to those things and doesn't know where to go or find, just come grab one of us and we'll easily show you on the website how to get to that stuff quick and easy. All right, who's hungry?